Hi, welcome to Grammar with Clarity for Everyone. This is the second part of lesson 6. So we had 6A and now we're moving into 6B. We're going to continue working with types of phrases. Welcome, everybody. I would like you to make sure that you have a couple of sheets of college ruled paper, sharpened pencil, sharpened colored pencils. If they're not sharpened, please do get them sharpened. And we're ready to begin. So we're going to pick up where we left off with the last lesson, and that was talking about verbals. And I had said that we can think of a verbal, we can break it into three other subcategories, and that's what we're going to start with today. Three subcategories of verbals. And we're actually going to do this on this page right here, this one that we were working on. We're going to do our verbal work directly below right here, instead of having the additional page that we've been working on where we had, so every time we worked through the poem, right? Then we went over here and we added more to specifics about the different phrases. For the verbals, we're just going to put it here. It's just going to help everything make a little bit more sense. So that's what we're moving into. Let's begin. All right, so the first thing that we're going to do is identify what a verbal is, okay? So we're gonna do kind of like a loopy thing here just to show that we're talking about verbals. I'm going to say a verbal. It's a word derived from a verb, but it's acting as another part of speech. So a verbal is a word. Don't worry if that sounds like gobbledygook, because we're gonna break that down, okay? Is a word derived from a verb. What does derived mean anyway, right? Derived means to take it from, to make it from. So verbal is a word derived from a verb, comma, but it is acting as another part of speech. Okay, and then the part of speech that it is acting as is really absolutely dependent upon what it's doing. So let's see here. All right, now we're going to go ahead and go over our little loopy thing here in heavy blue. Make sure that we understand that what we're discussing here is all related to this. So we're going to go ahead and go over verbal in blue. And then is acting as another part of speech is a pretty important concept from this. So at the beginning of the first lesson for 6, I talked about how phrases, each one is doing a different job. So this is kind of saying the same thing, like it's doing the job of a different part of speech. Okay, so the first of the 3 that we're going to identify is called a gerund. We're going to write it right here so we have a little bit of space below this one. And a gerund, it's a word that ends in ing. It is used as a noun. So its job is so it's a verb that's being used as a noun. So we're going to write is used. Oops. As a noun. That's its job. Okay. And we'll go ahead and just put a little box around that. And here's an example. We're going to put an example directly below that. So the word swimming, if it's in a sentence like this, swimming is my favorite sport. Should I just really make a misspelling of me? Favorite sport. Okay. In this case, you see we have the ing, it ends in ing, and it's being used as a noun, as a thing, something that is their favorite sport. So this is a gerund. Okay, the next one we're going to talk about is an infinitive. So we'll come down 2 lines and we'll write infinitive. Infinitives. Okay, this is an infinitive starts with the word to. Okay, so an infinitive is going to be more than one word. So it starts with the word to, and it may be used as a noun, as an adjective, or as an adverb. So again, that's its job. Okay, so here we have, I'm going to do two examples. I'm going to just come over here down a little bit. Most people find it easy to swim. Okay, to swim is the infinitive. There's another one. The urge to swim in tropical waters is common. To swim. Okay, and then the last one, and this is going to be a tricky one to try to fit in on my tiny bit of space. Hopefully you've got a little bit more space than I do. This is a participle. I might turn this one onto the other side. Let's start it over here though. So participle, this is going to end in ing, ed, or en. It's used as an adjective. That's the job of it. So an adjective is a word that modifies a noun, okay? Okay, let's do some examples. Let's draw an arrow here. Let's do some examples on the back side. So participle. All right, so we're on the back side of our notes, and I want you to just go ahead and write participles continued. And then we're going to end, we're going to have three columns, okay? We're going to have a column for the verb. And remember that, flip back to our notes. I want to remind you really quick that we're talking about verbals, okay? And a verbal is a word derived from a verb, but it's doing a different job. It's acting as another part of speech. So we've already talked about the gerunds, and they're using, their job is to be like a noun, okay? A thing in the sentence. And we've talked about infinitives, and now we're talking about participles. Participles are going to end in ing, ed, or en, and the way we can determine which one they are is if we can think about past and present. So what we're going to do first is we're going to identify what our verb is, and then if it's a present participle, as in present tense, spell correctly here, or is it a past participle, as in past tense? So we can look at the ending of it, and that helps. So let's go ahead and copy that. And then now let's look at the first example here. So we have, if our verb is cook, present participle would be the cooking cake. If our verb is cook, past participle would be the cooked cake. Okay, and another example, if our verb is rise, present participle would be the rising sun, and past participle would be the risen sun. So now let's talk about what this is doing for us. So if we take the cooked cake, for example, let's write the cooked cake. The cake is our noun. And cooked, this is a verb acting like an adjective, and adjectives modify nouns. So it's modifying cake. Okay, so now I'd like you to take this paper from yesterday's lesson or the last lesson titled Types of Phrases, and we have 6A on it. We have on the front page, we have noun phrase, a prepositional phrase, verb phrase, and then we have continued, and on the back we have adverb phrase. So now we're going to come down here and we're going to put 6B with a circle because that's where we're starting. Might as well instead of wasting paper. We're going to move down to the next one, and that's going to be adjective phrase. Okay, so by definition, an adjective phrase is going to be two or more adjectives working together to modify a noun. Okay, we're going to use red. So we're going to go over adjective for just adjective. Again, like I was talking about with the dark blue, I know that we've been using color coding dark blue for independent clause, red for dependent clause. That's not the case with this set of notes. We're just using it as another color. Okay, it's not going to apply in the future, but red in the future will always apply to dependent clauses. Okay, so really this is just two or more adjectives working together to modify a noun. So what we're going to do now is just put several examples and it's going to just jump right out at you. Okay, so we're going to have several here. Going to come, I like to come down a line and then one more so that my example doesn't run into my definition. And then indent a little bit, put a bullet point. He wore very expensive shoes. Okay, what does an adjective do? An adjective modifies a noun. What is the noun in this sentence that is being modified? He is not being modified. Shoes is being modified. Okay, so shoes is going to be our noun, and very expensive. Well, we could say we couldn't say he wore very shoes, right? So they're not equal adjectives. He wore expensive shoes, but very it's upping the ante on the expensive. Okay, so very expensive, we're going to call that an adjective phrase. They're working together. Again, two or more of these guys working together. Okay, so when we think about that, we want to think about, okay, so what are they? They are modifying the shoes. Very expensive. The next ones, go down one line. The dog that seems crazy barks all day. Okay, so the dog is going to be our noun. It's being modified by that seems crazy. Okay, we could say the crazy dog, or we could say the dog that seems crazy. All of it is modifying dog. Here's another one. She is a fairly intelligent person. All right, so person is being modified by intelligent. She is a intelligent person. But fairly is adding to intelligent. We wouldn't say she is a fairly person. That doesn't make sense. So this is definitely working with intelligent to like just give us that extra information about the type of intelligence to person. So we're going to go over fairly intelligent, and when they are working together, two or more, that's when we call them an adjective phrase, because they're two or more words working together to do a job. Okay. And that job is to modify that noun. All right. Okay, the next type of phrase we're going to do is called an absolute phrase. Now, just like we've been talking about, when we are trying to determine just exactly what a phrase is, we can look to its name. What does the word absolute do for you? For me, absolute, it's like, well, something is absolutely solid. Like there's no, like it's 100%. I'm talking about this 100%. It's absolutely covering it. So an absolute phrase is going to be a phrase that will modify an entire sentence, okay? So we're going to say these phrases modify the entire sentence. Up until now, the phrases have been modifying a verb or a noun in the sentence, but these phrases modify the whole deal. All right, we're going to use yellow for this. So let's go over absolute in yellow. And the thing about absolute phrases is that they have a couple of things that we need to keep in mind. They do not need a coordinating conjunction, which is a connector word. So we'll just do a little asterisk right here and say, they do not need a connector word. Okay, that's one thing. They do not need a comma. They could have a comma, but they don't, or I'm sorry, they do. They have to have a comma. Silly me. So they do, we'll do big, need a comma. All right, and let's go ahead and underline comma here. And here we've got a couple of them. So we'll do the first one. We will play tomorrow, comma, weather permitting. Okay. So we will play tomorrow as a sentence. Weather permitting is modifying the entire meaning of the sentence. So this statement right here, this phrase is going to impact whether playing tomorrow happens or not. So that's how it modifies the entire sentence. So we're going to underline weather permitting, and we're going to go over our comma in yellow. Okay, here's another one. Eyes filling, comma, she picked up her granddaughter for the first time. Okay. She picked up her granddaughter for the first time. That's our sentence, our independent clause. Eyes filling modifies this whole sentence. It tells us what's happening as she picked up her granddaughter for the first time. So that's an absolute phrase. Okay, let's see if I have another example I want to use. Okay, one more example. His inability with tools being obvious, comma, he called for help immediately. His inability with tools being obvious, he called for help immediately. All right, he called for help immediately is our actual independent clause here. It's our sentence. But his inability with tools being obvious is our absolute phrase that's modifying this. It's the reason he called for help immediately. Okay. One thing to note, and I don't, I'm not 100% solid on this, but one thing to note that I have noticed is that in these absolute phrases, we're going to have a word ending in ing. You guys see that? Kind of interesting, isn't it? So let's look for that too when we look at some additional examples on iExcel. Okay, we're almost done. We need one more sheet of paper and we're going to put types of phrases. 6B. All right, so there's only one more phrase that we're going to be defining in this lesson, and that is called an appositive phrase. Okay, appositives are these really cool words that function as renaming a subject. We can think of it like a clarifying word. So an appositive phrase would be a whole phrase that renames our subject or clarifies our subject. So that's what we're going to write over here as a definition. So we're going to write an appositive renames the subject. It clarifies it. The subject. Okay. Well, let's see what that looks like. Here's one example. Mr. Jones, comma, my history teacher, comma, is very engaging. All right. Mr. Jones is our subject of the sentence. What do we know about Mr. Jones? Did we get any clarification on who Mr. Jones is? We did. We found out that he's my history teacher. So we're going to underline my history teacher. That whole thing renames or clarifies Mr. Jones. So I'm going to draw an arrow to Mr. Jones because it clarifies or renames Mr. Jones, okay? Positives are going to be this light blue. I'm not sure if I put that or not yet. Okay, another example. Okay, so for this next example, we're going to just do a flip on this and see how with the exact same words, something can either become the subject or the appositive for the subject. So now we're going to write my history teacher, comma, Mr. Jones, comma, is very engaging. All right, so the subject of the sentence here is my history teacher. Mr. Jones is renaming my history teacher. It's clarifying who my history teacher is. So that is doing the same job as up here. But this time, Mr. Jones is the appositive. All right, there's something else to note. Note the commas. Okay, appositives are set off with commas. Positive phrases are set off with commas. It's one of our comma rules. And for the next example, I'm going to write a sentence that's a simple sentence, and then I'm going to show you how inserting in a positive makes it a little bit more interesting, because that's really what phrases do for us. They make our writing more interesting. Okay, so we're going to write, the girl earned good grades. Okay, and then we're going to come up with an appositive that is an extremely hard worker. Right below it like this. So when let's say you're working on a piece of writing and you're reading through it and you're thinking, well, where can I find some areas to develop and how can I do that? Well, appositives are great places, are great things, great tools to use to develop. So we'd figure out what our subject is and think, what else could we say about it that's important? So we're going to clarify or rename the girl, okay? The girl That whole thing right here, an extremely hard worker, is going to be our positive. So I'm putting the caret right there so that I know that I'm going to insert it right after the girl. So then how would that need to be written? It would need to be written like this. The girl, comma, an extremely hard worker, comma, earned good grades. Okay. Notice these commas are a big deal. That's our positive. You did it. You've made it through what, in my opinion, is probably the trickiest part of everything that we're going to be doing in this whole range of lessons. Learning about phrases, it's no joke what throws people the most when they're trying to figure out grammar are these phrases. Trying to figure out, I'm looking at this sentence and how do I break it down into its different phrases? And really the bottom line is, we want to think about the name of the phrase, see if that helps us think about the job that it has, and then see if we can pick things out that way. It isn't super easy. Don't worry if it doesn't come quickly to you. When you're working through the IXL sample problems, which we're going to be talking about here in a minute, you might get several wrong, but don't get frustrated, because the time that you put into the practice and thinking through it, and especially if you do get one wrong, if you take a minute and you read through the explanation that IXL will provide, that's really helpful. And maybe add a couple of little notes to the side of your notes to help you, whatever you have to do to remember and to give yourself a clue of what to look for as you're picking these out. So the next thing we're going to, the next thing we'll be doing is working through some IXL examples, and then this lesson is done and you're ready to roll. Okay, so this first example that we're looking at comes from the 11th grade IXL U.2, identifying prepositional phrases. So I want to point out that the directions, regardless of what grade level you're working in, it's going to identify the number of prepositional phrases that you need to pick out. So that does make it quite a bit easier. The other thing I would like to recommend is that you just Google a list of prepositions that maybe you can have in front of you. Or if you have a grammar curriculum at home, open it up, just look in the index and look for prepositions and open it up, and every grammar curriculum is going to have a list of prepositions, so you can have that list in front of you, but it's definitely a good list to have. Okay, so you would read through it, and at first you might be a little bit tricked as to what composes a prepositional phrase. So what you want to do is also have your notes out in front of you. So you want to look back again and see, what is a preposition, and what does a prepositional phrase do for the sentence? And then you want to read through it. So in this case, Samantha's thoughtful first-person essay about her maternal grandparents deserves an honorable mention in the personal narrative competition. So we pick these out based on prepositions. So the first preposition we come across is the word about, and then we look at what follows about. Is that a prepositional phrase, about her maternal grandparents? Absolutely it is. So that's the first one. When you go to click on them, the groups of words will be pre-highlighted, so that it'll be really obvious to you that the IXL program is calling this a phrase, and whether it's a prepositional phrase isn't going to be clear, but it will be clear that this group goes together. The next one, in the personal narrative competition, the word in is a preposition, so in the personal narrative competition would make up its entire prepositional phrase. Okay, you have to give me some grace here with the timing it takes me to pause this video, because my little box takes forever to pop back down. All right, here's another one from 11th grade. This one is practicing identifying appositives and appositive phrases. So let's take a look at the notes again. Grab your notes and let's remind ourselves what an appositive is. So as you see from your notes, an appositive is a word that renames the subject or clarifies it. So an appositive phrase is going to be a group of words that is renaming or clarifying the subject. Now, well, or a noun, it doesn't have to be the subject in the sentence. What's important to note, if you look at your notes, that we have a comma on either side. It's called setting off the phrase or isolating it. But if the appositive occurs at the end of the sentence, it wouldn't make sense to put a comma and then a period, right? And so the period is functioning in that. So we're isolating it, or we're setting it off with only one comma then. So in this example, many of the unforgettable scenes in The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey were shot in the cliffs near Piopio, a small town in New Zealand. So a small town in New Zealand is clarifying or renaming what Piopio is. And that's why this is a positive phrase. Okay, and then last example, let me get, whoops, share screen here. Okay, and the last example is also from the 11th grade, and it's talking about infinitives or infinitive phrases. So you have to be careful that well, first of all, remind yourself what an infinitive is. So look at your notes and remind yourself that an infinitive is a type of verbal. It's one of the 3 types of verbals. It's a word derived from a verb. It's acting as another part of speech. And an infinitive is going to start with the word to, T-O, not T-O-O, even though those sound the same. They're homophones. You have to be careful not to pick T-O-O, okay? And that it's used as a noun, an adjective, or an adverb, its job. So in this example, if you sit with your legs crossed or your feet under you for too long, your feet may start to tingle. This sensation, called paresthesia, is caused by pressure on the nerves. So to tingle, that is our infinitive phrase in here. So we would just click on that and submit. And again, like I had said in the last example, IXL is going to group words together. So you can hover over them if you're not totally sure. It'll show you, like, to tingle wouldn't include this sensation after it. It wouldn't include start to tingle. It'll just be the 2 that go together. They'll give you other ones that would be wrong, but the 2 that are correct are going to be correctly grouped, is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so here is your path for studying for IXL. For 7th grade, I'd like you to write down Z.2, FF new, and then in parentheses, please write both, because there are 2 FF news. Okay, and you need to practice both of them. And then you're also going to do one of the ones from 8th grade. You're going to do 8th grade GG.6. And that's only because that concept is not covered in the 7th grade. So, but you do need to practice it. Okay, and then if you're in 8th grade, you're going to write down AA.2 and GG 6 through 8. So all 3 of them, 6, 7, and 8. If you're in 9th grade, X.3, and then AA 3 through 5, so 3, 4, and 5. In 10th grade, X.3, and then AA 3, 4, and 5. In 11th grade, U.3, that's a U, not a B. Track that down. And W 3 through 5, so 3, 4, and 5. And then 12th grade, U.3, and then W 3, 4, and 5. So there are a total of 4 concepts, or 4 sections of IXL that you'll be practicing. I would like you to do at least 5 correct of each. So that gives you a total of 20 correct in total. So please keep track with, like, check marks or something so that you know. I think 5 correct of each indicates that you're clearly understanding what you're doing. And even if you end up doing 10 or 15 just to get 5 correct, by the time you get 5 correct, you will know what you're doing. However, if you want to do more, feel free to do more, but at a minimum, please do 5 correct of each one, so 20 total. Okay, wow, we're making it. All right, so we just finished the 7th video, 6 lessons, but the 7th video, and the 6th lesson broken into 2 was a lot to cover. The next two lessons. So the next lesson will be all about compound sentences, very simple to grasp, and then complex sentences. Also, you'll enjoy that, especially because you're feeling more confident with what a dependent clause is versus an independent clause. And now that you have that comfort level, putting that in play with our writing with compound sentences and then complex sentences is going to be easy breezy. After that, we'll be doing a whole series of commas and like just covering a lot of the rules and the reasons for using commas. And then after that, we'll be doing semicolons and colons. And then how do we punctuate dialogue? How do we do that correctly? Using quotation marks, but how? And then the last two lessons will be all about apostrophes. How do we use them in contractions? When do we use them? And when do we use them in possessiveness? So again, what I'm trying to cover in this entire series is just things that are commonly confused and tricky things for students in middle school through high school. Thank you for hanging in there with me. The rest of these should be a lot briefer. We've kind of took the heavier ones at the beginning.